The topic of high-speed rail in Australia has become a bit of a running joke. Basically, every election cycle, at least one of the major parties comes up with a new proposal to finally build a high-speed rail line. Then, the next election cycle, it all happens again, and each time, nothing seems to get built. At this point, most Australians don't take the high-speed rail announcements particularly seriously, and I think few of us ever expect anything to be done about it. But despite this, high-speed rail actually enjoys very strong public support. An opinion poll from New South Wales, for instance, found it to be the most important transport priority on voters' minds, and I'm sure this trend would be similar in other states. So in this video, I want to look at why such a popular project keeps not getting built. And I also want to see if there's a way to overcome this, to finally achieve the dream of high-speed rail in Australia. If you look at a chart of the world's busiest flight routes in 2022, you might notice the Sydney to Melbourne route taking the number 5 spot. In previous years, it's been even as high as number 2. The Brisbane to Sydney route also ranks highly, sitting in the top 20 in 2018, and that same year, the Brisbane to Melbourne route also made the top 30. So there's clearly a lot of people interested in moving between Australia's 3 largest cities. And when you look at those cities on a map, you might notice they make a nice, simple line running up Australia's east coast. And you might think that, given the incredible demand for travel along this route, that it might make the perfect spot to build a high-speed rail line. Well, you wouldn't be alone. There have been proposals to build a high-speed rail line and the resulting feasibility studies along variations of this route since at least the 1980s. And there would be some great benefits to building one. Of course, many people, myself included, would prefer the greater comfort offered by rail travel when compared to air, and not having to deal with the nightmare that is airports would be great too. But then there's the enormous environmental benefit. Trains, even diesel ones, emit significantly less emissions per passenger than flying or even driving. And a high-speed train would give Australia's domestic air travel industry some much-needed competition. So what's prevented all of these proposals from going ahead? I think there are a number of reasons, chief among them being the short-sighted nature of Australia's politics and infrastructure planning. Something like high-speed rail would take decades to build, and it would be very likely that whatever government initiated its construction wouldn't be in power when it comes time to cut the ribbon. In fact, a study from 2013 into building a high-speed rail line from Melbourne to Brisbane via Sydney estimated the line would take 45 years to complete. And that same study estimated the cost of the line to be $130 billion. That was 10 years ago, so I'm sure the estimate would be even higher now, not to mention the likely budget overruns. Another issue high-speed rail in Australia would face is its lack of density. Sure, Sydney, Melbourne and even Brisbane are very large cities, but there really isn't a whole lot in between them. High-speed rail lines in other countries operating over similar distances are often able to serve multiple large cities. For example, if I want to get a train from Paris to Amsterdam, 2 cities which are actually substantially closer than Sydney and Melbourne, I'm going to get a train that is going to pass through and stop at multiple major cities on its route, each of which easily has a metro population of over 1 million people. Between Sydney and Melbourne though, a distance that's about 50% greater, there's, well, Canberra, which doesn't even clock in at 500,000. This lack of potential intermediate stops does reduce the system's economic viability, as the new line can basically only cater to the crowd wanting to move between the capital cities. So, building a high-speed rail system seems like it would be prohibitively expensive, limited in its usefulness, and take around half a century before it's ever fully complete. Does that leave Australian high-speed rail dead in the water? Well, I think there's another way, and a way that helps avoid most of these issues. For this alternative approach, we can look to the United Kingdom, a country whose railways are by no means without their own issues, but where a whole lot more people choose rail when travelling between cities than they do in Australia. The UK only has a single dedicated high-speed rail line, the line that runs from London under the English Channel to the rest of Europe. There was supposed to be a second line built, but that was unfortunately recently cancelled. But even without purpose-built high-speed rail, the rail journey times between UK cities are often much quicker than driving. This is not the case in Australia. For example, if I want to travel between Sydney and Melbourne, it would take me an hour and a half to fly, about 9 hours to drive, but if I wanted to get the train, it would take me an additional 2 hours on top of that. Now let's compare that with a route in the UK. London and Edinburgh are just a little bit closer than Sydney and Melbourne, but I think it's a good comparison. By car, the journey would take you around 8 hours. The plane journey time is also quite similar at an hour and 15 minutes, but if you want to make the journey by rail, it takes under 4.5 hours. That journey time is less than half of the Sydney to Melbourne equivalent, and is much faster than driving. No wonder rail travel between London and Edinburgh has overtaken flying in terms of passenger numbers in recent years. But the line between those two cities is not a high-speed one. Much like the line between Sydney and Melbourne, it was originally built in the 1800s. The difference is they have progressively upgraded the line over time, allowing for faster and faster trains, whereas the Sydney to Melbourne line is still following the same old and curvy alignment that was built in the steam age. Currently, the fastest trains are able to travel along the Sydney to Melbourne route is 160 km an hour, but they're only able to attain this speed for small portions of the track, averaging speeds closer to 90 km an hour across the whole trip. This is because the old tracks that make up this route are quite curvy, slowing down trains as they go around tight bends and adding lots of unnecessary distance to the journey. Additionally, a lot of the existing route is only single-tracked, meaning it's not uncommon for a train to be stuck waiting for another train going the other direction to pass before it can continue. By ironing out these curves and ensuring the whole route is double-tracked, trains would be able to travel much faster and would be able to avoid unnecessary delays. Upgrades to the trains themselves, such as by using tilting trains which can navigate curves at faster speeds, could also help reduce journey times. In fact, Philip Laird, an associate professor from the University of Wollongong, estimates that by just upgrading 3 of the more problematic sections of track between Sydney and Melbourne, and introducing the use of tilt trains, we could reduce the travel time along this route by 5 hours. But taking this approach would have benefits beyond just faster travel times between the capital cities. Firstly, upgrading sections of the track rather than building completely new lines will of course be much cheaper and could be done much faster. Philip Laird estimated that his proposed upgrades could be completed in as little as 4 years. It would also benefit other services using the upgraded rail routes. A few months back, I did a video on the issues faced by freight rail in Australia, which I'll link to somewhere on the screen if you're interested, and I identified that one of the biggest issues it faces are the old tracks, making journeys slow and inefficient, but upgrading these tracks would let freight trains move faster as well, boosting their competitiveness. And while I imagine that with the upgraded tracks we would see the introduction of express trains between the capital cities that would skip past the towns in between to save time, the existing services that do stop at these towns would also be able to move faster, improving travel times for regional Australians as well. Ultimately, while I would love to see Australia pull out all of the stops to build an epic East Coast high-speed railway, it just doesn't seem to be happening. However, the prospect of upgrading the existing railways to allow greater train speed seems much easier to achieve, and would bring substantial benefits by cutting travel times between the capital cities, improving the efficiency of our freight railways, and even benefiting regional Australians travelling by train. And of course, all of this would help draw people and cargo away from heavily polluting cars, trucks, and aeroplanes towards the far more environmentally friendly railways. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear what you all think about taking the progressive upgrade option compared to building a completely new high-speed railway. I'd also like to give a shout out to the channel Sydney Trains Vlogs, who let me use a lot of their awesome footage in the background of this video. You can find a link to that channel in the description. And of course, please like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. I'm City Moose, thanks for watching.